Neuro Pride community, for those of you that are not aware, we're very big on books in Neuro Pride Ireland. Once a month, we host what we call our book show and tell. So it's a non-traditional book club where people are invited to just come along and talk about whatever it is they are reading at that time. Or even if you're not reading something at the moment, you read something ages ago and you just want to be able to talk about it. We talk about children's books, graphic novels, fan fiction, literally anything that people are interested in sharing. That way it is accessible to all. There's no, what's the word? No required reading, so there's no pressure, especially for our PDAers. And then there's no financial obligations involved. It is something that has worked really well for us. And we're very glad that every month we get to have a collection of books being showed by so many of our members. And that's why this year, when we were thinking about representation, it was so important to us to reach out to authors, because it is something that we are so passionate about here at Neuro Pride. And so on that note, I would love to invite our amazing guests to tell us a little bit about themselves. I'm going to start with Jess.
Thank you. Yeah, so my name is Jess. JJ Hale is my author name, and I write sapphic romance novels that feature neurodivergent characters. So I have 2 books out at the moment, and both books feature a main character who has ADHD. The first one, the character already had ADHD before the novel started, and the second one is about the person kind of figuring it out and their journey towards figuring out. If you didn't know, I have ADHD, which is probably obvious, and I was late identified, so I figured it out in, I think, 2019, and that's the same year my first book was written, not surprisingly. So yeah, that's me.
Amazing, thank you. Moira?
Hi, I'm Moïra Fowley. I'm the author of 3 YA novels and 1 collection of short stories called Eyes, Guts, Throat, Bones. Came out this year, this April. I've been writing since I've been published for about 10 years now. I've always written. And the focus of my books is usually on the I don't know, the intersection between the magic and the mundane. I don't really know how to explain that, but my ADHD, I was also late diagnosed, didn't kind of inform my writing in any particularly, I don't set out to write neurodivergent characters, or I haven't so far, but that'll be interesting to discover as I continue.
Amazing. Rosemary?
Hi, so I'm Rosemary. I'm a freelance writer, editor, and occasional public speaker. My work explores how disability, neurodiversity, and accessibility often intersect. I'm the author of Stumbling Through Space and Time, Living Life with Dyspraxia, which is about my own journey with figuring out how to navigate the complexities of dyspraxia, which is not really the type of neurodiversity that gets all the attention.
Amazing, thank you. And thank you all for writing such incredible books. I do want to take a moment to say that, because I have read them and I am very fond of them. But I want to ask, we have a question from somebody, Paula, asking, how do you manage with writer's block? If any of you feel able to?
Rosemary, you go first.
Yeah. So I find it's just a matter of planning. I have found over the years that my writer's block is associated with being overly tired and information overloaded. And I find that it's often I need to get away from the screen for a bit. I have to do something that's completely unrelated to writing and go back and think over what I was trying to write and plan a little bit more and have a bit of rest too.
Thank you. Jess,
Mine is very much, I think, motivated by external motivation, pressure, which, you know, probably isn't surprising. I found like my first novel, which was Truly Wanted, which is the first novel I ever finished, because until then I had never, like, I'd written and written and written, but I hadn't been able to finish anything or stick to anything. Then when I figured out what ADHD was and kind of different ways to do things, or to, you know, not push myself too much in ways that wouldn't work, that kind of helped. And it was a lot of external motivations, a lot of finding ways to get somebody to push me to do it, or to body double, or to I found like coffee shops, which is a bit of a cliche, but work really well for me, because I really like the background noise, but knowing that it's not my noise, like I don't need to worry about it, but it's there. So that kind of thing really helps me. So sometimes it's just getting somewhere like that. And then since I've gotten published, and now I have to actually propose the book to my publisher before I write it, and then I set myself a deadline of when it's going to be done, and that helps because I know somebody else is relying on this, or someone else is waiting. So that's helpful. It's hard to do, but it's helpful in terms of the pushing past that kind of block there with writing.
Moira, do you have any tips?
Yeah, I think I have two answers to this question. So one is that sometimes what feels like writer's block isn't writer's block, because writing isn't always about writing. There's so many things that come into because obviously when you're on deadline, as you were saying, Jess, it's very important to have, you know, your your deadlines and your accountability, and I like hold that to heart. But sometimes when I feel that I'm blocked, or that I feel that the writing's not flowing, for me the answer isn't to kind of to push against it. It's more to kind of lean into the fact that it's not working right now. So there are a lot of things that aren't writing that are writing. So what I'd suggest to somebody who feels like they're blocked is, you know, like you were saying as well, Rosemary, to step away from the screen, to get out of your head and into your body, I suppose, is what I'd usually do. Because a lot of the time when you're not writing, when you're not actually like typing it out, or you're not thinking about your story, or not trying to figure out plot points, your mind is doing it in the background. So if it is getting out into the world, moving in some way, if it is finding inspiration, reading the books that you come back to that inspire you, that motivate you, all of that is writing as well. All of that contributes to the writing of a book. So sometimes writer's block isn't writer's block. So the first part of it is that, and the second part is that sometimes it is, and sometimes it's something that's very hard to get past, because I'll find if I'm writing a scene and it's not working and I'm banging my head against it, and if I do all of the things that I usually do, if I go outside, if I go for a walk, if I go for a swim, if I breathe through it, if I try to come back to my body rather than trying to think and think and think, and especially for neurodivergent people, sometimes if you're trying to force your brain to do something, it's just not going to happen. Is in part that acceptance. And then if all of that isn't working, and if it's really about clicking your brain into it, but thinking about the scene or the story in a different way. So things that have worked for me in the past, if a scene isn't working, is that I will write it from, I'll close the document, open a different one, and write it from the perspective of a different character, or of the cat, or of somebody looking in the window. So you get a completely different view on what it is you're writing. And once you're out of it, it becomes much easier to kind of to see it come together again, and also to motivate you to go back to writing it.
Amazing. Thank you all so much. I think there's some great tricks and tips in there. I am not a writer, but I am a writer. I like writing. And I think you have all given so many amazing, I can see how they would all work. And to add something to myself that my granddad taught me when I was very young, because he wrote poetry, was you can't edit a blank page. Even if you think it's going to be awful, it doesn't matter. Nothing works on the first draft. Paula says, thank you very much. I appreciate all your brilliant answers and makes perfect sense. And just from Kira, we so happy to see great neurodivergent representation here in authors. As a dyspraxic who is trans person who is attracted to mainly feminine presenting people, I have rushed to social media to follow you all, and will be getting all your books to help explore myself more. I think that's the joy of it, is finding yourself in these characters.
Important.
Yeah. Ashlyn asks about breaking into publishing as a neurodivergent writer. The Booker Prize this year nominated an actually autistic writer for the first time ever, which is huge. But it seems that for openly neurodivergent writers, or writers who are not writing to neurotypical conventions, it can be really hard to get published. Do you have any thoughts on the barriers to publishing, or how things might be changing? Jess, did you come across any barriers?
Obviously there are, as in the whole thing is a barrier, really. If you think about the amount of steps that are in place to even get your manuscript in front of someone, you know, all those steps you have to remember to do, and in a right way, and format it a certain way, and have this in a certain way, and you know, there's so much there, that all of that is a barrier. I think I was very lucky with, I suppose, my journey with publishing, in that once I finished Truly Wanted, which was my first novel, I left it. I stopped, like I wrote it in 2019 and I didn't start 2019. I didn't touch it. It was there for months, and I was like, I want to publish it, but there's so much effort, you know, so much to put into doing it. And I was thinking I would self-publish, but I knew myself that, like, without that other external motivator, I wouldn't put it into it. I knew, you know, in terms of, yeah, I would maybe have skills to be able to do it, but I knew I wouldn't be able to push myself. So, but then, you know, the rejection side of going into publishing and then sending your novel out was terrifying too. So I kind of made a short list of some very all sapphic kind of romance publishers, and Bold Strokes Books, who's my publisher, was like the top of that list. It's the one I wanted to get to because I love all their authors, and they're like the second biggest publisher of sapphic romance, and they're, you know, I loved their writing, but it was just kind of a pipe dream thing. I never thought it would happen, you know, so I did just send it and then ignored it. I was like, this didn't happen. I'm not going to look at anything. It's gone. And luckily they were very open to it. They came back and they offered me, well, first they had said, you know, we want to offer a contract, but there's a few changes. And I was like, are they going to want me to, you know, change the neurodivergent character or something? Because that's kind of where my mind went immediately. Because I was like, do they want it more, you know, palatable for like bigger audiences and stuff? But actually it was the opposite. They wanted more, you know, they wanted more information about it. They wanted it more explicitly. Like I'd explicitly said she had ADHD, but they wanted more about RSD. They wanted, you know, rejection sensitivity dysphoria. They wanted more about a lot of that, which was great. And there was some other things that was, you know, I was fine with doing. And yeah, I was very lucky that they had, you know, contacted me and that we went ahead, and now, you know, I'm with them and they've been fantastic, like amazing. But like the whole publishing industry as a whole is obviously a big barrier in itself. Like Bold Strokes Books is a specifically queer publisher, mainly sapphic, but queer in general. And I never, you know, that's what I wanted. I wanted to be within that, but outside of that, I'm not sure, you know, how many publishers are very open to it, or yeah, I think things need to relax. You know, they just do, like all of the formatting, all of the ways you send it, all of this, like if the story is a story, it shouldn't need that, you know, or at least there should be easier ways for people to access, you know, sending this to somebody or getting this in front of somebody, because it is all about like just the steps to take, even just to format your novel, get it in the right place, send it to the right person with the right heading, with the right, you know, they and every publisher has a different one, and so you're like trying to change it multiple times to send it on. So hopefully that would change, or, you know, that's what I think is the biggest barrier.
Thank you. Rosemary, did you come across any barriers in getting published?
Oh yes, loads. I mean, I'm always very honest about it, because I'm traditionally published with my book I mentioned, and it took 90 different queries. Each one of them was like a whole bunch of agencies and publishing houses from across the entire English-speaking world, basically. And it was a period of about a year and a half of a lot of people telling me over and over again that my story wasn't mainstream enough, that it wasn't going to be relevant enough to audiences. And right at the point where I thought I was going to give up, I heard from a wonderful editor by the name of Amy Lancaster Owen, who does all the neurodiversity stuff at Jessica Kingsley Publishers. And I had, on a whim, done a tweet where I explained what my book was about and what I want to do with it. And she said, hey, let's talk about this, send me a long pitch and some passages. And I waited an entire year, continued to pitch around. And then she finally said yes. And it came down to her and one other neurodiversity publisher.
Amazing. Moira, I know you weren't writing from a neurodivergent lens as per se, but even the topics you touch on, like your queer representation and stuff, I know there does be a lot of barriers to getting those type of stuff published. Did you have any issues?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it. There's it's a complicated answer, because no, I didn't. I was very lucky as well, and I'm traditionally published, and it but also that doesn't mean that there aren't enormous barriers to people to neurodivergent people, to you know, people who aren't middle class, white, cis like me. Do you know what I mean? So like there's so many intersecting identities that are massively underrepresented, and also that publishing in general makes it very, very difficult for anybody to make a living from writing, but specifically anybody who isn't, you know, who isn't massively privileged. So that holds true as well. So on the one hand, I think it's really important to underline that, to say that is undeniably the truth. But also, I always want to be very careful not to put people off, I suppose. And I think that's why we talk about representation. We talk about like panels like these, talk about having queer authors or authors of color, disabled authors, neurodivergent authors coming and talking, because that becomes something that is like, that balances out a little bit the reality that there are these barriers that people face, but at the same time, you know, there are neurodivergent authors, there are queer authors, there are authors of color, there are et cetera, et cetera. So finding that balance is difficult. I don't want to be unrealistic, but also don't want people to lose hope. Like if you have written a book that is you have already done more than 99.9% of people. So I mean, after that, like that's the first barrier. And after that, yes, you know, it is likely to be very difficult. But also, you know, it can be done. So I don't know how to, you know, find the gentle balance between those two things, opposing truths.
That's fair, and that's completely fair thing to say, because there is some amazing writers in our community. We had a writers meet up last year, and there's so many poets and playwrights and everything in our Neuro Pride Ireland community. And outside of our community, there are also amazing authors, and whether people go down the self-published route or the more traditional routes, we are seeing more and more marginalized voices being platformed, and that is an incredible thing. Thank you so much. There is a question of, do you think there's anything libraries in particular could do to support neurodivergent authors? Jess, you're nodding your head there.
I think yes, as in, I don't want to say they're not. I'm sure, you know, libraries, and a lot of libraries are very open to it. And I know I reached out to the Cork Library about getting my book in, and they seem very open. I don't know whether they did or not. I have not followed up. But I think as a whole, you know, there could be more highlighted about it, and even stuff like, you know, having like Neuro Pride, you know, that kind of situation. If you had books for a certain week, you know, about different types of neurodiversity, or if you had even in terms of kids and getting kids writing, reading and writing, in terms of that, I'm sure different libraries are doing it, but I think on a whole national level there should be more of a push all around. So it's not, if you get a good library, if you have a good library next to you, or if you have someone passionate within that community who's pushing it, I think it'd be great if it was more, you know, coordinated, so that everyone had the same access to the same type of accessibility within
it. Rosemary or Moira, is there anything you'd like to add to?
Yeah, I really have a similar point. I've really found with this neurodiversity market that a lot of local community places, libraries, but also bookstores, where they have room for improvement is that they're not considering that neurodiversity as a concept is in a lot of different other circles, that there's parents, that there's schools, that there's businesses. Really encourage them to think outside that bubble and include that in all those different events.
Moira, is there anything you want to add? No, that's right.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that also libraries do so much. They're wonderful. They're amazing places. And Irish libraries in particular are doing so much at the moment, especially like countering this kind of rising hate that's happening. But I completely agree with what you both said, that that a very simple step is just like intention and representation. And so a lot of the time when I go into a library and if I see a display, there's often LGBTQ plus displays, or there's often displays highlighting kind of different issues, disability, like migrants, immigration. So to have to have kind of a highlight in a similar way. But yeah, just repeating what you're saying.
Amazing. And just in praise of our libraries, always room for improvement, never going to doubt that. But in praise of our libraries, a lot of the libraries have very much supported us in the last few years. In particular, myself and Gillian compiled a list of books written by neurodivergent authors or touching on neurodivergent, and I know Dublin City Libraries reshared that today on all their social medias. And if anybody wants to know about how you can help, you know, all libraries in Ireland you can request books from, and even if they don't have it in their system, if you request it, and they will add it to the list of things to purchase eventually, and depending on how many. So like if your local library doesn't have a book by Jess or Moïra or Rosemary, you can always actually request it from them. And we now have this centralized system as well that libraries can send it to each other. So yeah,
great to support authors without having to spend money. Yeah, absolutely.
And then the next question I will throw out to you is from our lovely audience. I have not even had to ask any of my prepared questions because people are so loving what you have to say this year. But sorry, not this year. I was reading a question there. But is there any book or author that particularly influenced your writing styles? And you just want to go for that? Moïra, you look like you're dying to say something.
No, not at all. I love how we're all so polite that we're like, just
I want to jump in.
both polite and in my case, trying to sort my like list and thoughts and try not to show that in my face, which clearly doesn't work because all of my emotions just play on my face. Who has influenced my style of writing. This is the problem then, is because I forget things very easily, and so I can have this list of my favorite authors and the authors who influenced me, and I know that I'm going to leave people off and I'm going to forget people, so I'm just often just go with what's off the top of my head. But at the moment, and for the last few years, I've been reading Carmen Maria Machado, Julia Armfield, Kirsty Logan, Daisy Johnson, and there's probably so many more, but all of whom write queer horror adjacent literary fiction. It's all very, very beautiful, absolutely like sumptuous, will eat their words, so would highly recommend.
Amazing. Rosemary, do you have any particular authors or anything that influenced you?
Yeah, on a stylistic level, I studied a lot of really wacky French stuff, a lot of Samuel Beckett, a lot of stuff from that era. I was interested in always interested in a lot of stuff around mental health. I read Sylvia Plath in college, and it changed my entire perception of mental health. But right now, I'm really loving the work of Alice Wong and the entire collective of disabled writers that are published on her site, and she supports very strongly as well.
Jess?
Yeah, there's a million authors that I love, and I suppose I used to read a lot of fantasy and stuff. I didn't think I liked romance until I figured out that actually there's sapphic romance and that's a thing, and it's there. And then I was like, oh, I do like romance, not that kind. So yeah, I've been basically, before I started writing romance myself more seriously, I was consuming every possible sapphic romance book there was, and there are many if you look. But I suppose one of my favorite authors was, and still is, Melissa Braden, who's actually published by my publisher, which is one of the reasons I looked into that publisher, because I loved her books. And she writes great sapphic romance. And then I suppose since writing more and since becoming, like, the sapphic writing community is quite small. It's big but small. Everyone is more tight knit, and so I find myself talking to a lot of authors that I would have read all their books and loved, and I'm like, what is this? Is this real? And so now a lot of them would be friends, and I still love their books. Lucy Bexley is another one who I love, and she's a very good friend of mine, but her books touch a lot on mental health as well, and it's sapphic romance. But her characters have a lot of like her last book, one of her last books, her character had bipolar, like she does, and just the way she wrote it and the way she represented it and within the story was just amazing. And as I'm reading it, it's like, this is what I want to get across, that it's it's real, it's raw, but it's a part of this person's journey, and also it's a romance, and that's okay, and it's all these things wrapped up in one, and it's, yeah, I love it. But yeah, every book I think that I've read has somehow, you know, influenced parts of what I write.
Of course. I'm just going back to that lovely theme of representation, because that's our theme of this week's festival, and so many of us love a good bit of representation. But Moira, I'm going to go to you for a second, if that's okay, because I know you're saying your books don't deal with neurodivergent characters and all this jazz. As a reader of your books, I very rudely will disagree with you.
That's not rude at all. Please do. Please do.
The way you portray anxiety and depression in your books is so beautiful. Because, and I know it's awful, I should not describe depression and anxiety as beautiful, but as somebody who regularly deals with those stuff, to see it so lyrically presented is so wonderful. And I think we forget sometimes that anxiety and depression and everything falls under the neurodivergent umbrella as a society. But being able to see those characters for me was so inspiring in a lot of ways. Being able to see and I got the same with your books, Jess, actually, as well. And I'm sorry, Rosemary, just because the context of fictional writing versus nonfiction, being able to see what I can see as my friends in all these characters. I'm reading about these people that, yeah, I can imagine going down to Galway and sitting there and having a little chat, you know, this type of way. And for some, that type of representation can be so powerful for so many of us that are exposed to the very abled, white, settled, all the normatives media that's out there. So many of us, the first time we see a lesbian in a book, we remember, or the first time we see. So my point being, representation is so important to us as a community. Moira, why was it important for you to write these marginalized characters? Did you have numerous marginalized characters throughout your book?
I mean, I think for two reasons. I think for I feel like I'm answering every question in two parts. Bear with me.
That's okay.
I'm not someone who plans what I write. So I don't have I suppose I don't sit down when I'm deciding what I'm going to write. I don't really decide it. And so it's not like I have this idea that I want to write this character with these particular traits, or that I want to represent these particular people. I just sit down and the story tells itself through me. But having said that, there is an intention. Oh, like, I'm not interested in telling straight stories. I've never been interested in telling straight stories. It's not, they've never been part of my life. It's not my lived experience. And there are enough straight stories. So, and there's, even in the kind of 10 years that I've been published, there are so many more queer stories. And because I started out writing young adult fiction, there were like that has boomed. It's beautiful. It's absolutely gorgeous to see. So that we have like young people growing up today have so much more representation than I did. I say we did. I'm not making assumptions on anybody else's age, but when I was younger, there was YA didn't really exist in the same way that it does now, or it did when I started writing. But queer characters were few and far between, and sapphic characters were even fewer the further between, and you had to really go looking for them. So the fact that, and I did have, we were talking about barriers before, and I did have some concerns back, because when I submitted, the accident season was in for publication. It was in 2012. And obviously, like, the publishing landscape was very different back then. And so I did have concerns around the queerness of the characters, and how that would be taken really by the publishers. And I was so delighted when my publicity team sent out the first kind of advanced reader copies with a little quote, and they chose a kiss between two girls to put in this little quote. And already for me, that was something that I wouldn't necessarily have imagined. And maybe that's a disservice. Maybe I'm doing disservice to the publishing industry at the time, but I was gently surprised. So even though I don't set out with intention when I'm writing, I definitely want to always just write queer stories.
Amazing, thank you. Rosemary, can I ask why writing this story was important to you? Why was that representation?
Really, it was a look back in time at a past version of both myself and my family. In terms of, I grew up in Canada, where really the representation and the discussion and the support around dyspraxia has always been really bad. And it was a very lonely journey. And I had it in the back of my head that I wanted to sit down and just describe my own experiences in the written word eventually. And yeah, this is the book that I eventually got around to writing, because I was starting to form my own dyspraxia community, and I was starting to talk to people about what they found difficult. And there was really realized the enormous comfort in having a community and sense of familiarity.
Amazing. Thank you. Jess, how about you?
Yeah, very similar, I suppose, to Moira, in that I always knew I wanted to write sapphic characters. That was, since I started writing, I suppose, which is a long time ago, but I wrote a lot of poems and stuff first. But every time I tried to write a story, that's what it was, Since I figured out that, like, sapphic fiction was a thing and sapphic romance was a thing, I was like, that's it, that's what I want to write. And so that was kind of set. That's the direction I was taking. But then I suppose so I'd actually started truly wanted before I knew I had ADHD. And then when I started figuring out what ADHD actually was, and that it wasn't, that actually that's the thing that I have, and I was reading through it and I was like, oh, this makes so much sense. And I started learning more about it. There was a lot of, and I'm sure a lot of people feel the same. It's a lot of like, why didn't I know this? Why didn't I see somebody who felt it like I felt it? Or why didn't I read anywhere? Like, I just read through this one thing and I was like, it describes me exactly. It describes my brain. It describes how I feel. If I'd have read this or anything like this, I mightn't, have waited so long to figure out myself. And so then I continued writing Truly Wanted. I finished it. And then I was reading back over it and I was like, I think Sam, my main character, has ADHD, and I didn't write it in that intent. Similarly, again, to Moira, I don't plan, well, I kind of have to now when I'm proposing a bit, but I find it really difficult. And the story changes way from whatever I propose. It's never what comes out. So I'm not good at planning. It's just the story comes out what way it comes out. So I hadn't planned it. But when I read it, I was like, I really think Sam has ADHD. And I was saying it to one of my friends and she was like, oh, I thought that was your intention. Like, yeah, she does, absolutely. And I was like, okay, I clearly projected enough onto the page that came out. But then to me, it was like really important to go back and explicitly say that and bring it on page, because again, it was going back to if I had read this, if I had read someone have this experience the way I did, then something like if I hadn't explicitly called it out, I'd be like, this person's like me, but I wouldn't know why. But if it's there on page, this person has ADHD, that's something in my head. And so the same way, sapphic representation was really important to me. So was this. And I'm like, this is something I can do. This is something I have an ability to do and I really wanted to. So there was, I suppose, probably similarly to Moira, there's a lot of thoughts and worries. And at the time I was like, about both, it's like, oh, if I just change this to a guy or change this, then maybe people will buy my book, maybe I could actually write for a living, maybe, all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, should I do that? But I just knew I couldn't, like, there's no way I could, even if I wanted to, but also I don't want to. There's plenty of people to tell those stories. So yeah, it was just really important to me that both of them were represented. And since then I realized I would find it really difficult to write neurotypical characters as well. I'm like, what do they think about it? I don't know. So that's another part, but it's easier. It's something I can relate to more and write.
That's fair. I will say, as a reader and writer, one of my friends challenged me last year to read some cis het books because apparently I read far too much queer media. I got about halfway through one and I was like, I really like this. It turns out the character was actually asexual. It was like, even when I'm looking for it. And then I realized, hold on, no, I spent my whole life consuming that media. I'm going to embrace the fact that we have so much available to us nowadays. We have one more question for you. And I do understand that it may put you on the spot, so feel free to be like, nah, I'm not answering that. But considering it's Neuro Pride, one thing that makes you proud of yourself. Anonymous, I'm just saying, you've asked the most neurotypical question. But would anybody like to say why they're proud of themselves? Go for it, Moïra.
Yeah, and like my question is, do you mean specifically because of our neurodivergence, or do you mean just proud of ourselves in general?
Let's just go in general.
But then
we are our whole selves anyway, regardless.
I have to think about that for a second.
Oh, okay. Jess, do you have an answer as to why you're proud of yourself?
Yeah, my book won 2 awards. I'm very proud of that.
Wow, yeah, that is
awesome.
something to be proud of.
Congratulations.
See, you can get published and win awards and live your writer dream.
I also wrote the same speech twice, so they had to read it out twice because I didn't expect to win twice. So I was like, I'm not writing a second speech for it to go nowhere. So I sent the same speech in for both, and then they had to read it out twice. So
work smarter, not harder.
Roll with it.
I love it. Rosemary.
I guess my creativity, I think my life would be much less interesting, and I would have taken like far less risks if I had been neurotypical, non-disabled kind of person. I think that's basically it for me.
That's completely fair. Moïra.
The face I'm making right now is that I was trying to think and listen at the same time.
Oh yeah, fair.
Always a challenge. It's not that I'm not proud of myself for things. I'm just trying to find a specific. I think that because the book that I'm writing at the moment, I'm going about it slightly differently after a bit of a dry spell. So I'm proud of myself for figuring it out and for detangling it.
Amazing. That is an amazing thing to be proud of. And thank you, because I'm going to wrap it up there because I've taken up enough of you as our wonderful time, but we are so grateful to you for taking the time to talk to us and for taking the time to write and making sure these lesser heard voices, even if they're becoming more common, are out there. We really appreciate it. Yes. And to my Neuro clan out there watching, listening, all that jazz, that's a wrap on our 3rd annual festival. Can you believe it? It's wild. But for those of you that cannot get enough of the neuro information, all our YouTube videos, we have videos galore. We have a lovely interview with Jess, another interview with another author, Ash. We even have a playlist specifically for reading lovers because we have so much about books and stuff like that. Hashtag Neuro Pride Day. I'm loving seeing everything that's going on over on the Twitter. It's making my day. And in a few weeks' time, we will have another panel, this time with neuroaffirmative therapists. So make sure to sign up on Eventbrite if you're interested in that. It's the event for adults regardless of neurotype. And if any of you have any children, well, 17 and under, we have a children's festival coming up in 2 weeks' time with multiple events. Regardless of neurotype, all children are invited. But thank you so much to our amazing authors and to our amazing community. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having us.